to go around and get to officially meet everybody. So again, welcome to our first Restorative Practices Community Informational. Our goals for tonight are really three things, or really four things: to discuss the meaning of restorative practices, discuss the meaning of RP, also to discuss how the restorative philosophy is being used in Farmington. So officially right now we have restorative practices facilitators at the middle schools and the high schools. We haven't officially had positions in the elementary schools, although our social workers and psychologists have gone through some training with restorative practices. So we're going to discuss how the philosophy is being used in the district. We're also going to share some resources with you all, and then finally answer your questions. We certainly don't profess to be the experts on RP, but we know a little something. And we're hoping that we can share some learning with you all, but also have you all share some learning with us. So as we're going, informal as possible. So as we're going through, feel free to stop us to ask questions. We'll ask you questions. We're just going to be one big happy family. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. So before we step too far into things, we want to introduce our boss. This is our boss. This is Dr. Jacqueline Dugal. You want to stand up and say something?
I really don't. First of all, I want to say I'm really proud of the restorative practices facilitators that we have here. The reason that they came into existence is because we were in significant disproportionality, which meant that we were over-suspending African-American males within who had disabilities. So we developed the program because, as a rule of the state, you have to set aside a certain amount of your funds to help support general ed students, not the students with the disabilities. So we came together and decided to have restorative practices facilitators in the secondary buildings so that they could help support all students. They don't usually get a chance to work with many of the students with disabilities unless there's a conflict. However, they get the opportunity to work with our general ed students to prevent them, hopefully, from becoming a student with a disability. So what they do is they help support students with their grades, making sure that they have check-ins, support with behavior, help to decrease suspensions, look at attendance, talk to parents. So they're there to really help get our students through the educational system. And they have done a wonderful job of not only training and becoming skilled professionals themselves, but making sure that the students that they work with are also making progress. So I just want to say welcome, and you're in for a treat because they are a wonderful group.
Thank you. And that's our boss, so we thank you for being here. So we're going to jump right in. Oh, quickly, if you go out of the door and to the right, the restrooms are there. Also, there's a pop machine, and then there's snacks behind us, if you need those things too. So definitely feel free to take care of yourself as we go. So we always work on building community and creating connections. So what we're going to do today, we're going to invite you, and I use the word invite you to participate in our candy circle. It's a check-in. And you don't have to stand or anything, but we do want you to join in. We're going to ask, and Greg, will you be our model for this?
Sure.
Greg will be the model. He's excited to do this. Greg's going to be our model. And this is just a quick way that we try and build connections. Teachers can do this in their classrooms, even if you're just in any kind of meeting. We like to do check-ins and just kind of get a feel for the room, see how people are doing. So if you wouldn't mind telling us your name, grades of children, if you have any. Also, pick a candy that represents your mood or quality. There's the fun part. So it's all kinds of candy in here, from Laffy Taffy, Almond Joys, there's some Smarties, just all kinds of things in here. So we'd like for you to pick a candy that represents your mood or quality. And if you could, just give us one quick bonus detail. So we're gonna try and make it through fairly quickly. So if you can think about it for a minute, then Greg will model it.
My name is Greg Rzdowski. My children, I have one child in grad school at the University of Minnesota, and I have another child who is, thank God, working and will be starting grad school next fall. I picked Almond Joy because sometimes you feel like a nut, and I wore braces for 12 years.
Okay, so that's his bonus detail. Okay. All right. And sometimes when we're doing restorative circles, we'll have a talking piece. Generally we do, so the bag can represent our talking piece. Okay? So I'm gonna go next. My name is Valeda, or V Sargent. Grades of children. I don't have any kids, but I work at Farmington, so I'll just say all high school. Those are my grades. And the candy that represents my mood today, Laffy Taffy, because I'm in a real good mood, smiling, laughing, feeling good. And a bonus detail, I went to Tahiti for my 40th birthday.
My name is Tom. My children are 35 and 32, so they don't go to school here anymore. They got their own problems. I'll say that I'll take a candy that has nuts in it, and I don't know anything in here, but like Nutty Buddy was what came to my mind, but it's not in the bag. That's okay. Bonus detail about myself. I've been following restorative practices for quite some time, since I worked at a nonprofit in Southwest Detroit.
Good evening. My name is Becky Heitch. I have elementary school children. A candy that represents my mood, I guess Smarties, because I feel like I'm going to learn a lot tonight. So I'm excited about that. Bonus, it's always so hard. I'm starting the restorative practice journey myself, so this is exciting.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Pearson, and I have 3 children and 2 grandchildren. And the reason I'm here, my older children are girls, and they didn't have some of these disruptive practices that boys experience. And so now I'm coming to engage because I know that the boys have a different set of unique circumstances, let's just say that. And my candy for tonight will be, I love candy. I say M&M's because I feel like they have a lot of surprises in here. You never know what color you might get, so I really like to go with candy. One bonus detail about myself, I'm in a sorority.
I'm Holly Aben. My boys are 3rd grade, kindergarten, and a preschooler. A candy that represents my mood or quality, I would probably also say M&M's, because with 3 young children, every day is an adventure and a little bit different. So you never know what it's going to be like. And bonus detail is that I used to be a classroom teacher, and I've never heard of this, so I'm really excited.
I'm Lori Taylor. Our kids are senior and freshman at North Farmington. And I also was going to pick Smarties because I was hoping to learn a lot tonight. And my bonus detail is I've been a teacher for 20 years. I'm a school administrator now, and we are also beginning our restorative practices journey, so I'm here to steal some ideas.
My name is Jason Taylor, and got a freshman and senior, North Farmington. This Andy, let's see here. I'm just going to take a piece of peanut butter cup because they're my favorite. Well, bonus detail about myself, I was born on the island of St. Lucia.
Now that is,
That's cool. Okay, I'm going for the one that is. My name is Jen Garland. All 3 of my sons graduated from North. I have one that's finished with college and working. I have one that's between attendance, and I have one that's currently going to Mayette in the evenings and working during the day, so everything. I picked out York Peppermint Patty because it's the season, and my bonus detail that I always start with, because people always go, ooh, is I was a Navy brat. I moved 27 times when I moved here. This was the 27th time. So there, for you.
I'm Carol Sadie. I work at Harrison. It's my 5th year at Harrison in restorative practices. And my first year, the other half of my day, I spent at STEAM, which is a brand new school, 2nd year in, and starting restorative practices there. My children are all in 10th grade. 3 of them are here babysitting tonight to help out. And I was looking for the M&M that probably they're gone. I was
Yeah,
it's just my favorite candy. My bonus detail is my kids are quadruplets and they go to North Farmington.
My name is Kenya Marion. My kids are, I have an 11th grader and a 1st grader. Actually, he's over there. So yes, I have that 10-year guy. I don't know what candy. I just like chocolate. So I'm just gonna put my hand in here and take whichever one I get. My bonus detail is I am the restorative practices facilitator at East. So along with those 2 brats that I have a lot of kids at East as well.
Hi, good evening. I'm Kelly Carpenter Crawford. I have 2 children. My daughter is a senior at Harrison High School, and my son is in the 8th grade at East and looking forward to starting at Farmington High in the fall.
It's Kyle's birthday today.
Yes, pick your birthday.
My bonus detail.
She gave it away.
Should pick an almond joy. I'm joyful that it is my birthday, and I'm happy to celebrate it here with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mary Beth Sikora. I actually have 2 daughters who went through Farmington schools, and one daughter has given me 3 beautiful grandchildren. Those children also go to Farmington schools. The oldest is a junior at Farmington High, and then his brother is a sophomore at Farmington High. And our little one will be starting kindergarten at Gill in the fall. She thinks she should already be going there. My candy is going to be a Jolly Rancher. I am the restorative practice facilitator at Power. And the Jolly Rancher is because just that, most days are jolly. And sometimes we just need to suck on something to hold our tongue and listen. And one bonus detail about me is that I have lived and worked in Farmington schools and in this community for 33 years. Oh, do I? I thought I was going to keep it.
Good afternoon. My name is Lori Williams, and I have 3 children. 2 there in college. I have a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old who graduated from Farmington. And I currently have a 6th grader at Howard. He's 11. And the candy that represents my mood would probably be a Laffy Taffy because I have a great sense of humor. My bonus detail, I lived in Germany for 2 years and I cannot speak very German.
My name is Sue Kendall, and my kids are grown but products of Farmington Public Schools. I went to North as their last school. And let's see. I'm going to pick a sucker because I'm a sub, and they usually think I'm a sucker. But I try really hard to be sweet.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Freed. I have an 8th grader at STEAM and a junior at North. I would say I'm going to pick a Snickers because I truly value what laughing does to a person. And one bonus detail about myself is I can ride a unicycle.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Terrence Porter. I have two children. Both are 13. They're 8 months apart. I am the newest to the team. Just been here with restorative practices for about the last about 2.5 months. But prior to that, I was in the district for the last 9 years. Candy that represents my mood is a Snickers, because that's my favorite chocolate. And one bonus detail about me is I love comedy, any type of comedic movie.
Hi, my name's Beth Hewlett. I have 2 kids in the district. I have a son that's a freshman and a daughter that is a junior. I see one lonely little plane where she's far. I'm going to take that because I think that's rude. Just kind of, I fly under the radar and don't cause a lot of trouble. So they're just kind of hanging in there. So my bonus detail is that I'm here because I have a personal interest, but I'm also the president of the Farmington Area PTA Council. So this information, and there are actually 3 of us here tonight from the council, I see. And so this is really going to be beneficial for us to take back out to our units and our members.
Did we skip anybody? No? That's the type of community builder that we always like to throw in whenever we have meetings, whenever we have trainings, just to lighten up the mood again. We're always interested in building connections, so that's just one way to do it. And everybody loves candy, right? So we like to use that. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg. Again, the RP facilitators, just really quickly. I am Beleda, and I'm at Farmington. We have Greg, and he's at North Farmington. Miss M, or Kenya, the kids call her Miss M. Kenya's at East. Carol's at 2 schools, Steen as well as Harrison. And then Mary Beth, she's at Power. And then Mr. Porter, or Terrence, is at 2 schools as well. It's Central and also at Harrison, okay? So there we are. So I'll turn it over to Greg for the activator.
Let's talk a little bit about what you either think restorative practices might be or what you know restorative practices to be. Sometimes restorative practices is also known as restorative justice. And just as an aside, it is relatively new in the United States. It started in the 1970s, and it was based primarily in the delinquency system. And since then, it's branched out into schools, workplaces. It's still prevalent in delinquency settings, businesses. It is, in the state of Vermont, schools are required to function within an RP model, and in the state of Minnesota, they have also adopted it. It is extremely popular in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, and also in a lot of European countries. But here, it's relatively new. So I'm interested to hear what you may think it is or what you know it to be. Don't make me start calling on you. Yes, ma'am.
So I don't know the process. I'm here to learn a lot about that, but some adjectives that come to mind are that it's an open process. It brings issues out into a public space where they can be discussed instead of kind of behind closed doors, so that different sides to an issue can be heard and considered.
Very true. What else?
Well, I think they used to expel kids, and now they're smarter and they try to work with them to get them back on track.
There is a component involved in student discipline. A kid cannot learn if they're not in school. And expulsion was the equivalent of the death penalty. It's like, you're out. And restorative practices a little bit has been a response to zero tolerance. Zero tolerance never meant zero common sense, but as it grew, more and more things got lumped in it. And so you could throw a kid out for this. It used to be weapons and drugs, and then it got expanded to this and to this and to this until, and you'll see it on a slide, it's called the school to prison pipeline. But what else? Yes, ma'am.
The word that comes to mind is mediation, and just having the two parties talk back and forth to kind of solve the problem and think of alternative solutions to what happened to create the problem.
That is very astute. There is a heavy emphasis on listening, and whether it's listening between students to each other, between the adults and the students, between all the components of the school. And there is a heavy emphasis on that. Really, RP, if you can think of, it's doing with students rather than to or for them. And so that's kind of like the underpinning philosophy. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Spending most of your efforts being proactive in dealing with student discipline instead of reactive.
That's exactly true. It's trying to diffuse the fight before there is a fight, to try to catch a kid before they're failing. And it is primarily dealt with establishing a culture within the school where everyone fits and everyone belongs. And it's where ideas are respected. We have a video to show you that will explain probably far better than I can. It's professionally done.
Let's see if we can get it to work. No, okay.
Changing at a breathtaking pace. Social patterns that have long characterized human life are changing dramatically around the globe, diminishing social bonds within families, schools, workplaces, and communities. But humans are hardwired to connect. Just as we need food, shelter, and clothing, we also need strong and meaningful relationships to thrive. With all this in mind, what is restorative practices? Restorative practices is an emerging social science that studies how to strengthen relationships between individuals and within communities. When put into practice, the effects are profound. In schools, students experience greater safety and sense of belonging, resulting in improved behavior, less bullying, and less violence. In workplaces, leaders facilitate direct communication among staff and address conflict as it arises. The result is higher performance, greater accountability, and effective collaboration. In criminal justice, new options allow victims and offenders, friends and family, to repair the emotional harm caused by crime. Throughout our neighborhoods, restorative practices give regular people more voice in the issues that matter most. In a nutshell, restorative practices is the science of relationships and community. Your individual daily interactions have a big impact on the world around you, at your job, with young people, and throughout your community. How you relate matters. This video was brought to you by the International Institute for Restorative Practices. To learn more, attend our flagship event, Basic Restorative Practices, enroll in a graduate course, or join us at a world conference.
Any reaction to that? Anything different than you may have thought?
My recollection, in my recollection.
He spent probably almost 2 years developing the look. We just had a philosophy.
Is that restorative justice, okay, has an implication that in reality was trying to capture a system that worked relatively well in tight indigenous and First Peoples communities. And I haven't heard a thing about that yet. That kind of, that's all. It wasn't in the video, it wasn't said yet.
Restorative practices is really rooted in Indian culture, American Indian or indigenous culture. And it is the reason that when we meet in schools, you might hear your kids come home and say, we did a circle. A circle is where when you sit in a circle, everyone's equal. Everybody can see everyone. And it originated among indigenous people or tribesmen, when they negotiated a treaty, when they made decisions about the community, it was done in a circle. It's also very difficult to hide in a circle. And so it allows, in a school setting, kids who traditionally may not have a voice to have a voice. Beleda referred to a talking stick. That again is Indian lore, that whoever holds the stick, or whatever the object might be, commands the floor. So it's one person talking. And the rules of the circle are very simple. Dignity and respect, listen to what's being said, and you're not talking to individuals, you're talking to the group. So it's for the betterment of the system or the class or the community as a whole. But that, and you're absolutely right, it grew out of the indigenous populations of the world. You can read this quote, but I would draw your attention to the word intentional, that as restorative practices facilitators, it isn't just putting the kids in a group and hoping somebody says something profound. It is addressing whatever the issue is and arriving at a solution, not only for whatever the potential conflict is, but also to enhance the community so that the whole culture grows in a more positive direction.
Any questions or concerns so far? No?
And for those of you who came rushing in here, please remember, there's refreshments there. Help yourself at any time. Take some nourishment, please. So, let's talk about this great little circle right here. Can everybody see that? Is it clear enough that you can see those 5 different circles? And what you see at the top are our high school students who addressed all of us at our professional development on election day. And we heard our students' voices as they addressed their concerns, their challenges, and what they really need from their teachers, their administrators, the individuals who work with them on a daily basis, what they need in their climate, in their community, and their expectation. And it was definitely very powerful. It had a variety of different reactions from staff, but it's true and it's their voice, it's their truth. And that was really important. So if you want to just take about 30 seconds and look at these 5 circles within that circle.
And there are your folders too.
Yes, thank you. And many of these things you've already heard from our team, as far as there really are the pillars. All vitally important, but if you can just focus in that top right-hand circle. Someone want to read that to us?
Who has a birthday today?
I would be happy to read.
So build healthy relationships between educators and students?
Yes. And I know that many of you have heard that commenting, but we know that that is really the basis. That is the foundation. That is what we really need to have. And our students, their voices continue to reinforce that to us. Any questions about the other 4 circles, or really that 5th circle too, as far as building relationships? Yes.
If only a couple of staff members at certain buildings are trained, is the eventual idea that you train all the educators and all the classroom teachers so that they can use this in their classrooms as well?
Absolutely. That is exactly what our charge has been from the district, and Dr. McDougall continues to
recommend and encourage us to work with our buildings, to work with our colleagues, to work with our students, and to work with our families. And this is just one tiny piece of the puzzle of us sharing tonight. We do partner with classroom teachers, and we go in and we do circles, and we also help them understand the language and the scripts and the pieces that we use, all really basing on, I believe in here it talked about that, and we heard it in the video, about that non-judgmental, to really understand, to really seek is like what happened, and not to be judgmental, and to really hear the voices of the students who are involved, or the student and the classroom teacher, or whoever is involved in that piece.
Is there another question? So several years ago, probably when my kids were in high school, probably here, there is a move to allow students to begin doing conflict resolution or conflict resolution teams. Okay, that kind of disappeared at or around the time that we had the staff reductions associated with the deep recession. Is this similar, different? I'm not addressing it to you, I just have the eye contact.
Oh, no, that's fine, because I was one sitting, and the team will also, there are some pieces to that. However, restorative practice, really, if we continue to go back to those 5 circles, it's a real, it's interesting, because there's sometimes some of the counselors, and I'm a licensed professional counselor as well, but sometimes with the counselors, when they want to sit in, or they're encouraged to sit in, we have these conversations because it's not a time for us to do coaching. It's not a time for us to do guidance. We are there, we are called restorative practice facilitators for a reason. We are just facilitating it. We are not making judgments. We are not coaching. We are not, doing that piece. So that is very different than most of our other processes that we have practiced in the past. Even with our conflict resolution or the peer mediation for students, there was a real guidance by adults there. Children were really to be able to do that, but what we really found was there's a great deal of adult guidance. And so that's the piece for restorative practice. There is the facilitator. However, it really is about what is occurring. And there's also a lot of prep work, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. There's another flow chart that I'll be sharing with you, because it's a real process that must take place. And it's a very scripted process that takes place. And we have to be very cautious, and that is why the district has sent those on the team to a very dedicated training, extensive training, because it's a very clear, direct process if you really are conducting a restorative practice with fidelity. Yes, so right now, we'd like you to think about when your children come home and they're really excited about what's happening in their classroom. And for some of us, we may need to reach back a little bit more, but we may even want to think about for ourselves. That one teacher, that one educator, that one person that you think about as somebody when you think of super teacher, superhero, someone that your child has really connected with, someone that you have really connected with. What are some of the qualities that are needed for that relationship and community building? And sometimes it helps when we think about who is that educator, that someone whether it's yourself or a family member, has really connected with. What are some of the qualities that that person has or had? Yes?
I think any adult who can have confidence in a kid, a lot of the teachers sort of support the kids and help them confident of themselves. I don't know how if I'm saying that right, but when teachers have faith in you, it helps you a lot.
Others?
I think you have to be, as a teacher, very approachable. And when you think about how scary and vulnerable you are in the act of learning, to be able to say to someone, I don't really get this, and to basically convey, I don't know what I'm doing, it's a huge risk. And that's something that you not only can go to a teacher to, but it's conceivable the kid next to you may be able to teach you because they already know it. And so that's a quality, that approachability.
I think for me, especially being in the middle school, listening, and because most middle school students are looking for you to give them the answer. And once they get the voice to understand the process and really allowing them to understand that they have all the tools that they need, and they really don't need the adults. Because if you just listen and build that relationship with them, I think that's key for middle school, because they really are looking for us to tell them what to do. And in this process, the beauty of it is sitting down in that conference or that circle and hearing the things that come from them, and they buy into it more, and connecting that with my oldest, just releasing him from me telling him what to do and getting his thoughts. He's like looking for that confirmation when they already have what they need. They just need us to listen.
I think another huge piece of it's empathy. You know, we all have a story, and we don't know each other's stories often, right? And sometimes, you know, kids just having a bad day or whatever, and it's also obviously knowing them, but then there's that empathy piece to be able to step back and recognize something else is going on. And I feel like that's like a huge part of this, not just community building, but also that just knowing our students and the relationships and building up from there with our students is really important.
I can just make one comment. My child will come home and he'll tell me, oh, so-and-so teacher, she's so uptight. She's uptight. You know, she's loosening up a little bit. So he likes those teachers that are not too happy, or lucky, but somewhere kind of in the middle, you know. And then he'll come up and say, oh, one teacher, oh, she's just too happy. Nobody's that happy. So he likes that.
Mid-ground. Mid-ground.
Not too uptight, but not too happy. Just right there. And he comes home, and last night I think he came home, I learned so much in science, Mom. I just learned so much. I learned so much. And, you know, so he was really excited about his day in science. So that's the teacher that is not too happy and not too uptight. So I get that one.
I think sometimes with what everyone has said, consistency in the adults that are in the building and in classrooms, I think that's really important, because especially our students who are, you know, in trauma or experience trauma or so on. I mean, it's good for all students, but I think those kids sometimes need the consistency from the adults, and if they're not sure how the adult's going to react one day compared to the next, there's not going to be trust. And so I think that everything that everyone has said, the consistency piece is huge. So maybe really consistently happy or really consistently, but like if you're a teacher that did really well, you'd really be confused.
He knows when there's something wrong.
Yeah, like,
what's that about?
right.
She's uptight.
It's interesting.
My child should never come home and tell me. You know, teachers need to be aware, you know, of how.
The words I keep hearing from everyone come back to the words that in my head is constancy, just an even keel, okay? An ability to maintain an even keel, okay? Rudyard Kipling's poem, you know, when all else is around you going crazy, you're able to, okay, that's, it's not a calm, it's the ability to recognize the circumstance and stay constant, to purpose, to value, to the child, you know, they know those things are there.
Yeah, and he does not like teachers yelling. He says, yell all the time.
Yeah.
You know, I don't like that.
I make a special point making sure I get to sleep on time, because I don't think it's fair for kids to suffer from me being crabby. I mean, what?
They're already sleep deprived.
I know. Well, my point is that I think sometimes
we overwork our teachers. And part of the, if they're having a bad day, sometimes it's that they have too much to do. We gotta be careful. I just think teachers have an awful lot to do. And I kind of wish sometimes they did.
The whole piece about respect too. We hear from our students. You probably hear from your own children if you have children. I know I heard from my daughters, and now I hear from my grandsons. As far as that respect, they can tell you right away if a teacher respects them or if a teacher doesn't respect them. And sometimes they just call it right out as far as, you know, this teacher likes me, but this one does not like me. This one does not know. And so we know these qualities, these pieces for that relationship are so vital for our children to learn and to be successful and to have those positive experiences. And that's something that we really work on in our buildings as far as restoring those relationships and having it be solid, and for the child to feel safe and for the child to feel comfortable and be able to communicate. Yes. These are a few voices of our children.
I love it when teachers show that they care and they prefer you.
I think it feels very comfortable when all teachers, everyone's safe, want to see the learning and support you.
I like when teachers try to get to know their students and they tell them their students about them too.
I wish teachers understood that if kids understand the material, they would like to school more.
We did work at Power, and this happens to be a 15-minute video. We're not going to take time to show it. There's all kinds of pictures of our students, and the kids went around and interviewed. And you know, what do you want the teachers to know? What do you need? What, you know? And so they did. They shared some very powerful information with us. And then what we did was we presented it during the PD time. And so that our teachers were able to really hear our kids' voices. And then we were able to reflect and do some work with that. Is that flipper not going? I should be up there. I'm sorry. I just thought you've been...
Another copy for the restorative versus punitive piece? I just missed it, I'm sorry. Purple one. So when we're looking at restorative discipline, we wanted to give you a nice takeaway for something that you can have to utilize at home. And so you're looking at what was going on, or what was the harm that was done, the two top questions, and how can we work to repair the harm. And when we look at the two columns, we have one side that is punitive and restorative. So if I brought it down more to a school level, a good example of a punitive response is, for instance, let's say a student was acting out in class, so chronic behavior, and the teacher just started putting them out of class. That would be a punitive response. More restorative response would be working with the teacher and the student, maybe doing a conference with them, possibly going in and doing a classroom circle to build community with that student. That's a much more restorative response. So if we take that now and bring that more into a home environment, and we look at the left column with the punitive response, we have the wrongdoings defined as the act, which is the authorities against the rules, etc. And accountability has a punishment attached to it, and there's a list of things there. I'm not going to read them all to you. generally has some kind of punitive or punishment response to it. If we flip that though, and we look more at the right side of that in a restorative response, how is it that we have an accountability, but we have a conversation? So we're having an opportunity for our students to, or our children, I should say, have a voice and talk about what happened, what was it that occurred, what do you think needs to happen to make it right? Versus I'm just taking your phone because you're using it for social media and you weren't doing your homework, for instance, and so now your grades are suffering. So instead of just doing that and having a conversation about what's the distraction, what's going on, you start building that relationship, and it's not this constant push and pull. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And I know that as a parent too, because I have 4 10th graders. So it's a constant battle of, if I use the phone example, for instance, of wanting them to have some autonomy, right? They're almost 16, and to have their free time to utilize their phone, but balance as well as if they're always on their phone and they're not doing their homework and that's impacting their grades, then I immediately would want to take their phone in a punitive way, right? But oftentimes I find that they're always like, Mom, we're doing restorative practices again, because it's just, that's enriched in our life, right? That it's all part of our family as well. And we have conversations about what's another option, what could be done. Doesn't mean there may not be some kind of consequence. Maybe they have less time on their phone, but they didn't just immediately go take their phone, right? And they are now having to be accountable for that processing piece of how did that impact your ability to be successful? How did that impact your ability to get your homework done that night? Were you able to do what you needed to do? The flip side of that, on the positive side of the phone, and I'm just going back, I'll use my own kids, is they will use the phone to help each other. They may talk to their friends, they may be on FaceTime where they can do work together. And so there's a negative thing as well if I just take their phone from them, because there are often opportunities they have to utilize their phone in a very positive way that is not distracting them from their homework. So if we look at how are things that you could use to apply this into your own home as a good takeaway, focus on those non-punitive responses to be able to resolve problems. If we look at the next one, it's talking about stealing. Focus on how they harmed others, whether it be a teacher, themselves, other students. If we look at number 3, if they broke something, how do they make it right? How do they repair it? Is it they do chores around the house to earn money to be able to replace that particular thing? That's working together and coming up with a restorative solution than just you're grounded or you're punished. It also makes them accountable to what they did versus just taking something away. So if I could bring it back into the schools for a second, typical response for years, actually, way before we came in as restorative practices, let's say 2 students got into a fight, automatic suspension, 5 or 10 days out. I heard that a lot actually when I first started doing restorative practices in the district. And then, well, they need a cooling off period, they need time to think. Well, then they just come back into school. Where was the conversation? Where was the education piece? Where was what are our next steps? Because often that may be a student that they had conflict with. Now they're back in the classroom with them. And maybe working on a project with them, or have another class with them, or have lunch with them, or they shared the same friends, et cetera, et cetera. Now by taking it to how do we come together and have a conversation, bring them together and talk about it. Not necessarily in that moment, right? There is that moment where they do need to step back, but not being just put out for 5 days without having that piece to be able to talk about what happened. And oftentimes, many times actually, students that I've worked with, and I'm sure all of us can attest to this, a lot of those fights that start out where we're 2 friends and they start horseplaying around and one shoved one shoved the other, and then one shoved too hard, and next thing you know, it got out of control. The intent wasn't even there to be in a fight. And those would be examples of students being suspended and being out, and 2 minutes later, they're already talking to their friends. So it's how do we make an accountability for that, and an accountability that has that education lens to it, and they look at things in a more restorative way.
Can I just say something? I know I'm kind of off. I just wanted to add that using the restorative questions, even at school or home, is very important.
Flip over and others.
Even in a personal situation, the what happened in the listening, what were you thinking, and allowing the other party to really think and listen to what that person is saying. So I think it's very important to know the restorative questions. I'll be very transparent. I have a younger cousin who's rather of a hothead, and she's calling me in this conflict with her friend, and they're both screaming at the same time. So I told her, I said, okay, I need both of you guys to be quiet. And I gave them the 4 questions. I said, I want you to go to one side of the house, you go to another, I want you to process this, and I'm gonna call you back. We like to do it in the order, especially at school. We have that time to do that pre-meeting, and we have that time to meet with the students, but I was like, I'm pulling straws, I'm gonna try it. And it was such a wonderful process, even in that 30-minute time frame. And the next day, they both called me and was like, I was so glad you told us to stop and take a moment. And I told them, only focus on these questions. And they were able to hear one another and try to move toward a resolution. It didn't get repaired that night. They slept in the same home. Nobody was harmed. They went from almost, seriously, they were almost ready to just, both of them, I'm like, somebody has to leave. And when they called me back and we were all on the phone, I'm thinking, okay, this worked better than I thought. Because usually you need that time, and we like to do it in that way. But if you tell people to just focus on these questions and the listening, and the results that come out of it is almost priceless. So I just wanted to make sure that you look at those questions and insert them in those situations. And you'll move from that punitive.
Do the kids ever refuse to do the questions? Because sometimes that's the problem. They're sort of stubborn and they won't cooperate with the system.
We don't have any stubborn kids.
Ever. No? I'm middle school. Sometimes they're not ready, but they'll come back. If you give them, we have little cards. If you don't force it and you give them an opportunity to say, I think you want to talk to me as opposed to going into the principal's office, they're going to say, give me some time. So usually even those stubborn kids, you can kind of get them to reflect. Again, it may not be in the time frame you want to do it in. You really have to not be married to, got to get this done right away, or give into the pressures of teachers or administrators saying, just do it right now. If you really give in to giving that wait time, having those pre-meetings, usually you can kind of get them to go through the process.
Because just exactly what Kenya is saying, your question about teachers and that's a piece that we work with staff, and they have these cards, they have these questions that we go over. Our noon supervisors as well, the lunch people, as far as when they're, addressing things. Now you see, I just pulled this right out of my wallet. My second grandson, the sophomore, sometimes he said, watch Pearl, I think you better get your card out. They don't call me Grandma. Pearl, you better get your card out. And so, go in that wallet. The other day, he said, can I borrow that card? Because we need it, his brother, and I'm going to use the card. So these questions really do help.
And here's the question here. And some schools, they have the staff members just keep them in their landings, which is nice, a nice, handy way. But when we're challenging behavior, we ask what happened, what you were thinking at the time, or have the kids process. What have you thought about since, who's been affected and how? And then finally, what do you need to make things right? And then for those who are harmed, what do you think when you realize what happened? What impact has this incident had on you? What's been the hardest thing? And then finally, what do you think needs to happen to make things right? Now, a lot of times in high school, it's shared responsibility. So it's not necessarily a clear case of who was harmed or who was responsible. So it's kind of a combination of the questions. But we often, we use the questions like clockwork to the point where kids can just start reciting them out, where they're like, I know you're gonna ask what happened. I know because these are proven questions that work, and it helps them to process. And occasionally, even though we don't have many stubborn kids in Farmington Public Schools, maybe we have 1 or 2 or something like that, but occasionally when kids are not interested, just like Ms. M said, giving them that time is helpful. And we always go through the process of self-restoration. So when we have the individual pre-meetings before we do a full restorative conference, that's self-restoration. And sometimes kids aren't ready for the full conference yet, but they do those individual conferences where it's just you and them, and they'll open up and they'll lighten up in many cases.
If I can go back to just the sheet real quickly. Yeah. Oh,
Oh, sorry.
On the questions, do you typically, like, if it's between two people, do you do the questions like with them together or like individually?
If you've already done the you do the that's a great question. You do the pre-conference first, so it is individual. You also see where they're at and where they are if they're ready. Like you were saying earlier, they may not be in that moment, and then they go through it together. And the thing that I wanted to add to that was the tone, because as a facilitator, when I'm at work, I'm pretty even on my tone, but at home, if I'm mad at one of my kids, I already know my tone is not, I have to check that. So I wanted to bring that back to the question sheet, is recognizing, because it is hard, they know how to push our buttons, right? So it is hard for us to be reflective on that as well, that, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to get into a power struggle, I'm trying to give them that opportunity to have their voice heard. That's a great question.
I wondered if some students may struggle around being verbally communicative in the process. Do you use alternative ways? Do they ever write a letter, maybe express something through art that may also contribute to this process?
When kids are suspended, they go home with a suspension packet. And for kids who may not be, as a student, communicating pen and paper, you can adapt a lot of this kind of in draw instead of write. Draw what happened, draw how you felt. And it becomes a springboard to a discussion that's all based on these questions. Somebody had asked about a kid who doesn't want to participate. What happens sometimes in the restorative classrooms is that the other students, I don't have to get the kid, they go and say, you need to be part of this. Even if you don't participate, you need to listen. And in a circle, when you ask questions, every student has the right to pass. And then you come back and ask them. But they'll, pretty much once they get the routine, they request it. I mean, I have a class now that once a week, every Friday. It's like, and it may not be about that class. It may be something, if there's something that's going around in school, like certain events, homecoming, there's tends to be a lot of drama. So, it's like basically we did a circle. It's like, so what's new? And some of the stuff, the rumors, it was like, that didn't happen. I mean, and so you have kids who are more informed, and when they go out into the school community, they're the ones saying, no, that didn't happen. Rather than you hear that, well, there was this huge fight and 30 kids were there and everyone was armed and dangerous. That didn't happen. And so, that kids communicate that way as well.
And I've had it where the student didn't want to write, and he asked me to write, and he trusted what he was writing. He told me what he wanted me to write on there and what he didn't, because writing wasn't his strong point, but he wanted to do his pre-meeting. He wanted his voice heard, so I wrote it, actually, his words for him.
I'm curious to know about kids who are reluctant to participate in a circle because they were on the receiving end, or they were the victim in that case, and they don't want to sit.
They don't have to. So we have a few things going on. So we have a lot of proactive circles, which we really like to do as much community building as possible. Like our candy circle, that was a proactive circle. And then we have other circles that are responsive circles. Something happened, some harm took place, and we have to respond to that. So the harm, those are the questions that we saw earlier, those are the circles where we primarily use those questions. Who was harmed, what happened, all those details, what needs to happen to make things right. But when we're doing proactive circles, it can be about anything. It could be getting to know you, it could be homecoming drama, or whatever it is. But our idea is the more proactive, pouring into your classroom, pouring into your students, trying to get to know where they are, it helps to reduce the number of reactive circles. So if you're doing that proactive, I think when we did our original training, it was like 80% and 20. So if you're spending time proactively getting to know your kids, getting a feel and a pulse on what's happening in your classroom, you don't have as much drama. You don't have as much of a need to do those reactive circles. But our process, and Mary Beth is gonna go through it in just a minute, we always, always, always do pre-conferences. So we never just push kids together and make them do a circle. That's not what we do at all, because we want it to be a voluntary thing, and we want them to be able to get as much out of it as they can.
Circles are never required.
So maybe I'm premature in asking this, maybe you were gonna cover that in a little bit, but I'm curious to know, if you have to have a reactive circle, and one of the parties wishes to not participate, how then does the other party, what would their process be? Because then they don't really have the full circle of people that would be affected by those actions, correct? Because for lack of a better word, the victim, it doesn't want to participate. So what then happens with the student who maybe needs those incidents addressed that maybe they were a part of? Does that make sense?
Let's go through, your questions are excellent, and that's where we kind of jump to this piece. So right here you see where it says restorative conference there. You can see these 3 areas that occur before that conference. And we talk about, so a referral is made, and you're able to see here either an administrator, a counselor, a staff, or a student, possibly family members. So that's where it all begins. So really any community member, within our community can make a referral or ask for that piece. Then, and it's always related to restoring a relationship, restoring that piece. Then what happens is we verify that whoever referred has reached out to families, all right? We always let families know when there is going to be a restorative conference so that they're aware. And that's also a good, why we want more of our families, our community, to understand our restorative process and philosophy here for Farmington Public Schools. And this is the key right here, those individual pre-conference, there's a lot of work. And we have at times have to help our colleagues understand that we can't skip over that. That is where some of the best work, that preparation work, really occurs. That's where we really can figure out if that person who has been harmed and then the individual who may have caused that harm, where they are and are they ready. It also is who else is involved. Because if something happens in a class, but all those members really aren't involved, it's not going to necessarily be a whole class, piece. It's a very specific science that occurs. And when you meet with them individually, you really go through that whole script. You really see where they are. You go through those questions and understand where they are and what they want to share and what they need to express. And then you meet with the others as well and go through that exact piece. We're then able to determine a lot. Sometimes kids will go, no, I'm not doing a circle. Okay, you don't have to do a circle. You're not going to be made to do a circle. Can we just talk? Can we just kind of go through that process? And as they are able to express and reflect, yeah, maybe I do want to talk to them. Maybe this will be good. And then we also remind them, as the facilitators, we're going to individually sit down with that person too. So we understand where the parties are before we come to the circle together. And so that's where so much of that work is done. And then we go into the restorative conference and then we also, establish those norms. And that's a very direct process also. Discuss the restorative questions. We determine the agreement or the restorative plan, and then we evaluate. They're doing that evaluation. Yes, question?
Are some of these between students and teachers, or is it?
They can be, yes, they can be. Absolutely, they can be. And they are, but in both.
My second question was, I've heard there's a lot of cyber or technology problems. Are some of these technology?
Yes, yes. They certainly are.
even though they might be like you were describing, oh no, I'm not doing it, then they see that their voice is being heard, there's so much value to that for them. And then they're like, oh yeah, there is something I did want to be able to say with them, and then that changes that paradigm, right, of, no, I don't want to, and then, oh wait. So it is so valuable to be able to do all the precursors, right, before actually having to do or whatever.
And it's that piece of having those relationships established and them having trust that they know that it's going to be a safe place. And there's a lot of prep work to do, you know, and to prepare both. Yes?
So when you hear the term that there's going to be a restorative conference or practice conference, is that always facilitated by one of you, or does that mean there are teachers that are facilitating these or other staff members? Who's trained and handles the facilitation of these meetings?
Typically us. Yes. But teachers do sometimes just run their own classroom circles, typically proactive circles. But if there's been harm, it's most likely going to be a restorative practitioner or a restorative practices facilitator doing that, because it'll happen outside of the classroom.
And they're also not a substitute for whatever discipline is going to happen. The whole purpose of this is to restore the relationship or repair the environment that was harmed. So a student will get whatever an administrator may deem, and then the goal is, like on a suspension, when they come back, it's like, okay, how are we going to ensure this doesn't happen again? And if there was a classroom event, you may do a circle then that, okay, how is everyone impacted by this? And so again, it's not an alternative to discipline. It's something entirely different.
But I think we should make sure that we do try to if a suspension is on the table, we are trying to negotiate it. If the principal said, I think they need 5 days, you would often find us saying, no, what is the harm of that? And we're trying to negotiate a teachable moment as opposed to sending a student home for that length of time. Because if you give a student 1 day or 5, they're going to learn the same thing. So most of us are usually trying to navigate a different or an alternative to that suspension so that we can do the repair sooner than what the administrator or whomever is recommending. So we don't have the power to say they can't be suspended, but we all have a voice, and I think we have a relationship that's unique to with our administrators that we can say, well, can we talk about this? Because maybe this is too harsh or this is too long, and I have some alternatives that I think I could suggest. So I think with that said, we do try to limit the suspensions.
And we do even more than try. We do. We argue. Advocate. We advocate. I'll right that.
Fight together.
There's a little teeth in all of this, is that Farmington Public Schools school board has directed that administration needs to consult and contact restorative practice facilitators. And so we are to be part of these conversations. And so that's what our buildings, do. And so that question as far as, right, to do a proactive circle is one thing, but I don't believe in any of the buildings that anyone does a restorative conference except for those of us on the team who've been trained and for that piece. But it is a directive from our school board. Restorative practice must be consulted and have some conversation regarding those disciplines. Questions here? Yes.
I don't know if I missed it, but like I'm noticing there aren't elementary schools here. This isn't an elementary school?
No, it's just secondary, so it's really from 6th through 12th.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I was thinking that very same thing, because when my children were, so my one daughter, my youngest, was actually an Eagle. And so there was this kid in her 2nd grade, I'll never forget this. This boy was so, his name is Ryan. Anyway, And he was so disruptive in the class, and I was thinking, when are they gonna do something about that kid? Because every day it was escalation in terms of something he did the day before. It wasn't to my kid, it was to some of the 22, 20, 30, whatever kids that were in that class. And I'm thinking they would have that little circle, and I was thinking, when are they gonna do something about this kid? Because every day my child would come home saying that this kid had done something. So why aren't these, because he was in second grade. By the time he got to fifth, I mean, he would probably be a terror. I don't know, because I didn't follow him. But, so why aren't these practices being implemented at that age? Because they're young, spongeable, and they can hopefully alter their behavior. But before they get to middle school, will they become terrorists?
Well, I can say that there are some elementary principals that reach out to us. There's, I won't put the building out there, I actually love the building, that if they call us all the time. So they have the option and the opportunity, and we have done some trainings with staff in the elementary level, so that they have the ability to use us. Some teachers, I have a teacher from last year that called me this year, and like, it works so well, can we start from the beginning? So the beauty is selling it, I think, and making sure that, I think Dr. McDougall does a great job with allowing us to train other staff to do it. I think it goes along with us giving out the cards and asking everybody to use the language, because we want to be clear that it's a philosophy. So it's just not set for us to use it. We want to teach other people to use it too, and we have done some trainings with elementary staff. With that said, I'm not sure, because we do know when we start younger teaching that they learn.
I think it was targeted toward secondary, because when Dr. McDougall talked about disproportionality, and when the state stepped in and said no more, that kids who were handicapped under special ed were being thrown out, and especially students of color, that it was at the secondary level. And so that's really where originally there was 4 of us who started, and then it's expanded. Also, elementary schools do a lot of restorative things already in their grades, and actually high school could learn a lot by going, like they do circle time, they're on the carpet. It's the same thing, and we would have benefited by, we would have kept that going.
Yeah, we had,
And so,
Mr. Rudolph was our principal, and they had that circle time every morning, and I would be like, oh, this is great. Then when she got to class and she would come home with her stories, I go, oh my God, I can't wait for 3rd grade to get away from that kid.
Well, they may have needed some additional interventions, you know, because the circle in itself is just one thing. But if you have a kid who has whatever particular issues and they just need more support, then we have to be able to find other interventions. It'd be great if we could all just do a circle in the morning and everything would be perfect. I'd be doing circles at home. I mean, everybody would just have circles going, but we have to pull other items out of our toolboxes too. So just out of respect for everybody's time, we're down to about 15 minutes. So we do want to make sure that we go through these couple slides to talk a little bit more about some of the work that we do with staff members. So for professional development opportunities and book studies, these are 4 of the books that we've used when working with our staff in each building. And typically, we have staff meetings each month, and we'll offer restorative resources or restorative strategies or tools, because again, like we spoke of, restorative practices is the philosophy. So it's the philosophy of intentional relationship building, and we want people just to embody that philosophy in pretty much everything that they do in an ideal world. So we work with teachers on classroom interventions. We talked a little bit about classroom circles earlier. Sometimes we have to have courageous conversations and deal with culturally competent strategies or teach culturally competent strategies. And we work again with administrators as well as classroom teachers when we're trying to figure out alternatives to suspensions. There's a 7 factors worksheet that the state, did you all know that the state of Michigan has a law for restorative practices? And the state requires, that restorative practices are considered before suspensions occur. So administrators really need to be digging deep and looking in their toolkits and toolboxes to come up with other ways to keep our kids in school. Because like Greg said, they can't learn anything if they're away. So we want to try and keep our kids in school. Here are a bunch of the things that we do with the kids. Greg, you want to jump in on this one?
An alternative to suspension is exactly that. It's when I was a social worker in the district, a fight would get you 10 days. And it was the death penalty. I mean, kid was 10 days behind. So there are different alternatives that can be used. You know it's effective when the kid, you say, okay, this is what we're gonna do, and this is what we're gonna help you do, and the kid says, can I just have the 5 days? It's like, no, you're gonna come to school and we're gonna do this. So there are creative consequences. There are school-wide and classroom circles, and sometimes you do circles within circles that it's basically, if an issue is identified, then you do a smaller circle, but you have an empty chair. And you have the other kids in a circle around it so they can go and feed in their suggestions and then come back out. And so we talked about RP conferences, and every kid who is suspended at the secondary level they go through a reentry process where before, I think Carol had said, you're out and then you're in. And you know, I kind of think of, you can threaten someone and get arrested in 2 hours post bail and be done. You didn't get 10 days cooling off period. And so on some level, it kind of puts the common sense back into discipline, and it's a reminder that the purpose of discipline is to teach. And so otherwise, you know, you're stuck with punishment. These are some of the books that are used, or creative consequences. Brown Girl Dreaming and The Hate You Give. Kids have been involved in discussions with those books. And if you think of a typical book study, it's the same thing, but it's done at their level, whether it be middle school or high school. There was an incident where some kids were involved in cyberbullying, and that because of not so much Facebook anymore, but Snapchat and Instagram, and there's a whole bevy of ways you can insult people. That kids, you know, rather than they had to do research on what was cyberbullying, how does it impact them, and so a lot of times the consequences are very specific to what they did. So at North, kids got caught drinking. If they're seniors, they have to contact a college and find out what is the policy at a college if there's binge drinking, or to find out resources. They don't have to identify themselves as that, this is what I'm doing, but there's this education piece that this is what you're gonna face, and this is what you're up against, so you might as well know it. It makes more sense, at least to me, than saying, you're out 5 days. It's like, no, you're gonna do. And so it's basically making amends. You violated the relationship within the community, and yes, you did, but the goal is to bring you back, not to exclude you. And that's the crux of it.
Any questions? Yeah.
There's I have an awareness of some tension between expected disciplinary outcomes or expected or necessary outcomes seen by a resource officer that might appear to be, or at least become, conflicted with restorative practices. How do you guys feel? Because I've heard about it from other places. I just want to hear your point.
I'm not sure I fully understand.
Hey, so if someone walks down a hallway and slugs somebody, that is an assault, period. End of discussion. That's an arrestable offense. That's not a restorative moment. Some people don't necessarily see it that way. Others do. I'm asking the question.
Thank you for the clarification, because I wasn't
Thank you.
I think,
Oh, go ahead.
I think that in responding to that, it has to do with, we do work with liaison officers, and the Farmington Hills Police has now started within their database, kept track of when a restorative response was entered in as part of the police being involved in that. Although, when you have a kid push or punch another kid, I would agree that it's obviously time for discipline to intervene, but only until recently has schoolyard fights turned into juvenile court proceedings of felonious assault less than murder. And so kids can get ruined, and the fact is, children of color have been the ones that it's been visited on the most. And that on some level, I think that what restorative practice does is give a voice that, look, there is another way of dealing with this. No, do I think kids should go down the hall beating the hell out of each other? No. But I do think that the purpose of a school is to teach many things, and not all lessons come from a book. Now, I don't think that kids should be, your target practice. And restorative practice is not an alternative to suspension. To me, when you're suspended, you have violated the community norms to such an extent, you have to leave.
If I were to express it in the terms of a tribal or an Aboriginal, it's a period of banishment.
Right. And there is an element of shaming in restorative practice that you need to think about what you did. And the goal is, okay, you thought about, now how are we going to restore?
So it's the re-entry part.
Right.
Where you guys,
and that's where we fit.
I had a question about what does this look like in other districts, especially when you brought up the point that there's Michigan law that requires that this be a tool in the toolkit. And not that, I mean, every district is going to have a different makeup, but are there some that are maybe a little bit, have invested some more resources, and maybe all the administrators are using this language and the culture's a little more developed, or are we really kind of ahead of the game in terms of what you guys are doing?
We visited Lansing. They had a restorative justice program, and theirs was specific to harm having been done. It wasn't a restorative practices program. We also visited Waverly, which is in Lansing, Ypsilanti. Gosh, I can't even remember.
Detroit has trained everybody. I mean, and this is not an act to Detroit. They've had so many problems that they've targeted from a culture standpoint. They have looped into, and I would encourage you to go to the IIRP website. You'll see everything that's there. And Detroit is known as a restorative city now, that their philosophy is based on that. And so I think a lot of times we're consulted because we have been here, and other districts will come here.
But we're on a journey. We certainly are in no position to profess that we know everything. We are still learning and growing, and even when we do our training with the International Institute for Restorative Practices, they speak of it as a journey. It's not a one and done. We're always learning, always growing, and our communities are always changing. So it's just like a continuum.
Well, part of my familiarity was from restorative court, where family violence, other issues. Similarly, it's kind of I look at it as akin to an alcohol court. You can go into court and you can adjudicate under the law, or you can go into a court that's seeking to restore you. Those alternatives, the court never relinquishes control. It offers this as an alternative. If you don't want that alternative, deal with what the judge is going to hit the gavel with. But you're offered an opportunity to meet within your faith and culture and community to resolve your conflict or your offense before you return to court.
Can I say, I think we have to be clear, even just going back to like a student walking down the hall and hit someone. In restorative practices, especially if there's harm, there's no harm or hurt, you may have a bruised ego, or you may be embarrassed, there's always opportunity for repair. And we have to be careful not to insert children in the school to prison pipeline. So restorative justice and restorative practices have to differ because we are still dealing with children, and their intent usually is not to harm or hurt. So every moment is a teachable moment, even if it means someone did a physical act. That doesn't necessarily mean that they need to enter the justice system because they hit someone or assaulted someone, because there's still some repair that can be done. So I think we just have to be clear that even in the high school setting, these are still children, and we can't just throw them away to that system.
If I could just go back to your question. I teach in West Bloomfield, and we are just starting our journey this year, and actually I consulted with you this summer. I'm the first restorative practice coach is what we're calling it, West Bloomfield. We've started with circles at the elementary school. We have K2 buildings and then 3-5. And again, as it was said earlier, it's very natural at the elementary school already. But we are starting with our formal conferencing at the middle school. The high school, I think we're going to come along possibly next year. But I know Bloomfield Hills has an equity officer, and they're running. They have I think, pretty extensive program at the high school, middle school. Novi is doing some things as well. I know they run circles at their middle schools. Walled Lake, I think, has some administrators that have been trained just in talking with people that I'm familiar with there. So it's definitely something that's up and coming in Oakland County, I think, and being used. But I know you guys definitely are further along than other districts. So
one thing that, when we started restorative practice, as North as an example, my first year there were 10 fights. Not knockdown, drag out, but tussles, whatever. What we found is that over the next 4 years, none of those kids who were in a fight that we did alternative consequencing to, no one was ever in a repeat fight. And so the number of fights have steadily, where fights are not the norm anymore.
Yeah, that was my question. Do kids come to restorative practice, or do they come back together next week? Is it actually teaching them how to prevent a situation, or just dealing with the situation?
That's like those kids who went through, like, they had an alternative consequence, we did restorative consequences, they were part of circles. They did not repeat. You would not see another kid, the same kid, in another fight with somebody else.
And often if they come back, they're coming back with a friend who then they are now referring, because they're like, this really helped me, can you work with so-and-so? And they start bringing their peers in to get extra support.
The one thing that, what you'll hear is, wow, the schools have gone soft. You know, in my day, it's like, it has to do with, basically the state came in and said, enough, and they should have. Kids were getting tossed way too much, and now the pendulum has switched from zero tolerance to, we can't just, kids are like boomerangs. If you throw them out, they're coming back, whether it's in 10 days, 180 days. And so now, you know, there is at least an acknowledgement that they are our children, whether they're in school or we throw them out. Now we just try to keep them in.
And with that, we're right at 8 o'clock, so we want to be mindful and respectful of your time. We want to wrap up really quickly. You're going to pull the name. MB is going to pull a name. We do have a raffle item, a basket with some goodies in it for those who pre-registered. And then we have the evaluations floating around. If you would be so kind to complete those, that would help us. And
Did you pre-register? If you did, we'll get you.
yeah, so everybody who registered, we put their name in. Gia, she put your name in as well. And we just want to thank you all for spending your evening with us. We are always around, so if there are any questions or things that we can continue to help with, certainly let us know. We hope that there was some learning tonight, or that we were able to answer some of your questions about RP. So MB, will you do the honors for us? And it's all kinds of good stuff in this class.
Lori Taylor.
So Lori, you have a basket full of Farmington stuff. So thank you for coming, everybody. We'll be here for a few minutes kind of packing up, so feel free to stick around if you still have questions. Thank
And
you.
you had our names, if you need us to pull, maybe that would be a good, piece to pull back up our names in our schools, so feel free to contact us. We can flip back to that slide.
Oh, yeah, our names on?
Trying to go back.
There we go.
Always now. There we go. So Greg, how long did you come into